Okay, so this is what we're going to look at today, and it's actually inputting and formatting this form in the page. And this is a form that's on my consultancy page on my website, and it's actually a gravity form that I used to create and embed this, but it's a styled form because when you put the form in straight away with no formatting, it won't be laid out and it won't look like this. So I'm going to show you today how to style your form like this. And there's two main areas. One is the layout of these different fields. We've got these two top fields which are asking for first name and last name, and they're side by side. And then we've got this vertical stack of three fields which are asking for email, and then this is a URL field asking for a website, and then we've got a drop down list to select an option. Then we've got a larger paragraph text area which is the full width, and then finally we've got a submit or get in touch button. And all of these fields have got a blue border around them, and this is all custom styling. And another thing is that it's responsive, so when you've got the full web page open it looks like this, but if you minimize it you will see when it gets to a certain size that last name goes into the stack and beneath it, and then you see as I keep shrinking it, this large text field and the submit button at the bottom reduce in size until you reach a specified minimum width, and then they stay at that width, so all the text fields are the same. And basically the reason for that is if you're viewing this website on a mobile phone, you will see this layout, and you see it still looks nice and it's still very usable. But if you're viewing it on a desktop or a larger tablet screen, you will see this layout. So this is important because you don't know who's going to be looking at your website and whether they're going to be looking on a mobile device or not. So you've got to make sure that things look good in both devices. So okay, this is what we're going to do now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to input a form in here. So this is a test setup page I've made for this gravity form tutorial, and I have down the left hand side this link for forms, and this is because I've got gravity forms installed. So if I click on forms, I'll open this in a new window. You see I've got consultancy form, which is actually this form here, and I've made a copy of it here. So you see we've got all the areas, and I've got other tutorials to show you how to make this gravity form or make new gravity forms and embed them, but this is about styling. So we've got a single line text field for your first name, last name and your email, but then we've got a URL website field here to input a website. Then we've got a drop down field here for those drop down options, and then we've got a paragraph text field here. Consultancy to test is the form name, so we can go ahead and embed the form. So we've got this add form button which appears once you have gravity forms installed. So I click this and select the form. So I want this consultancy test 2. I don't want to show the title and I don't want to show the description. Insert form, and there it is. So we'll update that, and then I'll right click and just look at the page in a new window. So there's the form there. You see it looks completely different, and actually I'll make this full width. Right, so there is our form. You can see it's a lot different. All of the fields are stacked below each other. They're all full width. The name of the field is above the text area instead of in the text area. And they haven't got borders around them, or the border's not the right colour. So we need to format these things. And the first thing I want to do is go into the forms, the gravity form settings here. And you'll see we've got these top two areas are the important ones we need to look at. We've got output CSS, yes, no, and output HTML5, yes, no. You want to set them up with no for the CSS and yes for the HTML5. And I'll show you what happens if it's not set up like this. And by default it isn't this way, so you need to change this. So currently this is how the page looks. and each one of these individual fields is targeted in the CSS with our custom code, which we'll do in a minute, to style it like this. But if you go into the settings and say yes for CSS, and I'll save it, if we refresh this page, you'll see straight away the styling's changed. This last name text field isn't floating next to this area, and no matter what you do, some of the CSS coding has obviously taken effect, you know, the blue outline and things like that, but to float this next to this field here, it can't be done, or it can't be done easily at all without selecting no in this option. And also the writing in this URL field isn't great, and the spacing between some of the fields isn't correct either. Go ahead and select no again, and then we'll refresh it. You see it goes back to the nicely formatted. And if we click this HTML5 output to no and have a look at how that changes things, you see a lot of the CSS styling is kept, but this URL field isn't right. Just make sure you've got these boxes checked. And if you start doing some CSS styling with the gravity forms and things don't seem to be working correctly, it could well be you've forgotten to change these settings. But we haven't done any styling yet, so obviously this hasn't affected our new form. But the first thing we want to have a look at is this field titles are above the placeholder areas rather than inside. And this is how it is by default, but we can get that straight away. You need a plugin. So I'll go to my plugins, and the plugin I use to do this is this one here called Gravity Forms Placeholders add-on. And if you go into add new, actually I'll go back, I'll just copy this name, go add new, search for the plugin. Okay, so it's this top one. You see I've got it installed. There are other gravity form placeholder plugins, but this is the one I use. So go ahead and install this if you want to do this with your forms. But then once installed, it still hasn't done it by default. But what you've got to do is go into your form, and then in the form settings you have this area here for CSS class name, and you just need to type in G placeholder, which I haven't spelled correctly, G placeholder, and then update that. And then this puts these field titles in there. And you'll see that actually the color of these has changed apart from this one here. And this is because we need to target this field, this select field, with our CSS in a minute to change the color. But all of the other placeholder names, they've gone a lighter grey color and a bit of a smaller font. And this is because we put in some CSS code previously to style the placeholders of these ones. And I'll show you how I did that now. In our back end, we go down to Appearance and Editor, and I'll just go all the way down, and this is actually the code here that we use to target the placeholder. And this is just so it works in the different browsers, but the important bit is we've got the color, which is this lighter grey color rather than black, and then the font size. And I'll just show if I change this to 50, for example. And I may need to change it in all of them, but we'll just try here. See, it's gone huge, but that's ridiculous, so I'll change that back to 18. Right, so now we'll go ahead and style the rest of this. I'll open up the forms again because we need to have a look at some of the form fields. So this is form ID number 8, and we need to know that, and also we need to know the individual IDs of each of these fields. This is field ID 1, field ID 2, field ID 3, etc. We also need to know what kind of field it is. So these are single line text fields. This one's a website or URL field. This one's a drop down or select field, and this one's a paragraph text or a text area field. We also need to target the submit button here. And we'll just change this quickly. At the moment it says go, whereas on this one it says get in touch. And we can easily change that, and that's under the form settings. And it's just down here in the form button. We see one text, and we want it to be get in touch. So that's easily how to change that. So now we can go down to our editor again, go right down to the bottom, and this is actually the code here that I've used to style this form here. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy what we've written here, but we'll go through it. You've got options with Gravity Forms to either target all the fields at once and put a default styling for all of them, or the different kinds of fields, or you can target each individual field and format each one individually. And that's what I've done, so we can style each thing individually. So you see here, we start off with the body G-form wrapper, and all this part is normally the same, but this is a part that we need to change. So this is saying target the form ID is number 7 for this form, but with our new form it's number 8, remember. So if you go to the form editor, it's form ID number 8, and then this is field number 1, which would be this one, and then it's also saying it's a text field. So I'm just going to copy this line of code here, go down to the very bottom, and we'll start doing a new set of formatting. So remember, ours is form 8, and it's still field number 1, this top one, and it's still a text field. Okay, so I'll just put open and closed curly brackets. Let's update that. And if we refresh this page, nothing will happen because we haven't done any styling yet. But now we've got this field targeted, so we can do some styling. So for example, we'll say, we'll give it a width. We'll change the width of this. And I want to put a percentage because I do want the ability for this field to get larger or smaller depending on the size of the screen. So I'm going to put 25%. And nothing's happened. But that's okay, and the reason nothing has happened is because sometimes it still takes the default formatting for Gravity Forms, even though you set the settings to say overwrite these or don't use these. But what you can do is you just need to place this bit of code here exclamation mark and the word important, and update that. And that basically just says use this one. This is the formatting you should definitely use for this particular div. And now if you refresh the page, it should take that formatting, and you see this field is shrunk right down now, and that's 25% of the screen width for this particular styling. And you can see the width of the page is from here to here, so it's 25% of that. So I can go ahead and do the same for these other two divs, because they're both text fields also. And this is field number 2, ID 2, and field ID 7, because I must have just placed these in a different order when I created them. So 2 and 7. So you go into the editor, and I'm just going to copy this code because it's exactly the same, because they're both still text fields. But of course this one is called 2, this one is called 7. And then if you refresh the page, those shrink down too, which is great. So the next one we want to target is this put your website area, and this is a URL field. So we can go into the editor, I'm going to copy this area again, paste it, but this time it is field number 3, and instead of being text at the end, it's actually URL. See how that's shrunk down? And just to prove actually that does make a difference, I'll put it back to text, and you'll see that it doesn't format it because it doesn't recognize it. So it's full width there. If you change it to URL, right, so that's that one done. Now we've got this field here which hasn't taken the placeholder formatting, and it's also wide. And this one is a select field. So again, we'll copy this because the rest of it's the same. So this whole front part is the same, it's just targeting that particular element. And of course this text field, this drop down field has an ID of 6, and it's called a select, and this time we need to get rid of all of this, put select at the end. There we go. And we may as well change the font color and the font size while we're at it, so it's the same as the rest. It is color, and the color we use is hash 686868, and then the font size is 18. And we could have just copied this because remember it's this here. You have to remember to update it every time, of course. Right, there you go. So now we have this drop down, all the same color. What I'm going to do now is, this is all these dimensions such as a width are taking it relative, because I'm using percentages, are taking it relative to the page width. This is 25% of the page width. But actually you'll notice here that the width of this form is less than the page width, and then I've got it floating in the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a div, we're going to create a div and put it around this form to shrink it down a bit and say we don't want it the full width of the page, and then put this div around the form. So that means all of these fields within the form will be formatted relative to the side of this div. So we'll create a div, we'll call it, we'll put the hash which specifies the start of the styling for a div, and we'll say container test form. It's just a made up name, it can be whatever you want. So I'm going to copy this name, Control C on that, I'm going to update this. And then I will go to our edit page, so we've got our form embedded. So I'll put this div around this form. So you just write this code, div id equals, then that name, I'll just paste in there. So that's starting the div, then we'll close the div with a closing div tag. Update that, so that means this form is enclosed in this div now. So nothing will happen because I haven't formatted this div, but we can go in here and say we'll give it a width of 80% of the screen. Which it's done, but you can't really see anything because there's no border or anything to this div. So just for now I'm going to put a border around this div just so we can see it. So we put the code border, we'll see it's 1 pixel, 1 pixel, solid, and then hash CCC, which is a dark grey colour. There we go, so we've got a border around this div now which encloses this whole form. So you see it's not full width. What we can do is we can float this div centrally on the page, and we just put a small bit of code in, which you put margin, and then 0, and then the word auto, and then what this does is you see it centralizes this div. So now the form is centralizing the page at 8% of the page width. Okay, so now we'll go and format these different areas properly so it looks exactly the same as this. So the first thing we want to do is we want to change the width of these because these aren't right. So that at the moment they're all 25%, and I just want to make them a fixed width of 270 pixels, which is about the size to look good on smartphones. Just going to copy this for all of these fields because we want them all to be that width. So there you go, so they're all the right width compared to the other one. So this last name field is below this first name, but we want it to the right. What we're going to do here is I'm going to float this element left, but because it's small enough to fit in this gap here, it will float left relative to this field here, so it will go here. So we'll just go back into the editor and we'll find the right area, and I'll just put float left, and I'll put the exclamation mark important just in case it needs overwriting. And I'll copy that, and I'm going to put that into the first name field as well, because we want both of these fields to float left relative to each other. So just copy that in there, update, refresh our table, and there we go, it's floating right relative to the first field. So that's great, so that's working. You see that these are pushed up tight against each other, so we need some kind of padding between them. So what I'll do is I'll put a padding right on this first element, just so there's some padding here, or actually some margin right rather than padding, to push this last name element further away. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a percentage, and I'll put 2%, and we'll also include the word important at the end. And this percentage means that the gap will change depending on the size of the screen. So we'll update that and refresh the screen. And there we go, nice. Let's put this little gap here. Of course, we want a gap between each of these fields as well underneath. So that will be a margin bottom, and because this field, this email field, comes after this last name field, is actually the padding underneath this last name field that will affect this email one. So I'll put in here margin bottom, and this time we'll do 10 pixels, and again I'll say important. There we go, so that's spaced out nicely. We need to push a bit of margin here between these two elements and these two elements and these two elements, and also here. So we're just going to add those now. This time I just copy the same one, stick it in here, and stick it in here, and finally stick it in here. That's great, so it's pushed all of those down. We haven't formatted this text area field or this button field yet, so they haven't got any width. So you can see there I've set a height on this and also a blue border on this, which aren't taking effect on here yet. So we'll go ahead and create some styling for this text area and also this button. So again, we'll copy this because most of this code is the same. So for this text area, it's actually ID number 4. So we'll change this bottom bit to 4, and it's a text area this time. So instead of a select, okay. And then we will put a height of 100 pixels just to have some effect. Okay, so this, you should see this reducing the height of this field here, which it has done. We want to push this get in touch away a little bit, so we'll put that same margin bottom as we did on the other ones. So just copy that margin bottom, put it into this text area div, and that's pushed that away, so they're all nice and equally spaced, which is great. And because we're floating this left, it should stack it up if we shrink the screen size down, which it has. But you will notice that it's not got a gap here because we haven't put a margin bottom on this first element, so it just stacks up right against it. So we'll go and do that now. Let's copy that same code and we'll stick it in for this first area. So nothing's changed when we refresh the whole page, but if we squash it down, you see it's now nice. But what you'll notice is here is it all squashes down, which is fine, and these top elements all stay the same size because they're all set to a prefixed width of 270 pixels, but this actual whole div isn't. The whole div always says be 80% of the page screen, and these two bottom divs we haven't specified a width, so they'll just automatically by default be 100% of the div that they're in, so they'll just shrink with the div, and we want it to stop here, but of course if the screen still shrinks, they're still squashing down because we haven't said stop at 270 pixels. And we can deal with that now. And what we do is we want that area to be 100%. We want these areas to stretch the whole div. So that's fine. Although actually we don't want it to be the whole div because we want it to be the same width as this. So I'll go in here and we will specify a width, but we'll make it 93%, and this is only because I know this is the width of this div. So 93%, and I'll put important again just in case I think it overwrites it. So now the width of this text area is going to be 93% of the div that it's in. And that just so happens to be the same distance there, so everything lines up nice and neat. Okay, so we want the same to happen to this get in touch. And this is a new area on its own, and what we do for this is we need this part of the code is the same to target that submit button, but then we need to specify the ID of the form, which is number 8, and then you put G form underscore footer, and then we put input and type equals submit. And don't worry about this code if you're not really into this. You just need to know that this targets the submit button. So we've got that, and we can say you want it to have a width of 93%, just like the other one. So I'll update that. And now you should see this submit button shrink down to this same level on the right hand side when I refresh the page, which it hasn't. And the reason it hasn't is because I made a mistake. I need to give it a hash here for a div, and then this should work, which it has. You see, that's now the same. And actually the way it goes from black to this salmon pink color is this is the default gravity form setup for this particular theme, or actually more correctly it's the Genesis theme. I'm using the Parallax Genesis theme for this website, and this defines the default colors here. So this is all, we've got this footer area of the website is this same color as this, or links to this salmon pink color, so we won't worry about that here. But you can see this form styling is starting to get pretty close to this, and if you put these blue borders around, it will probably get very close. So that's what we'll do now. We put a blue border around all of these fields. We don't need this open anymore because we've done all of the IDs, so we'll shut that. What we'll do is I'll put a border around all of these fields, and we'll make it a bit thicker, so we have 2 pixels. We want it to be a solid border, We want the color, it's actually 119 DC9. Okay, we'll just check that before we put all the other ones in. So I've put that around one of the first text area. There we go, it's nice and blue. But you'll see that the email field has been pushed across to the right, and we can combat that by specifying all the different fields in this form to float left, because we haven't done that yet. So we'll go into the editor and put float left for all these individual fields. So I'm going to put float left on all of these different elements. So this is the email field. This is the URL field. And this is the drop down list. This is the text area. It's not so important for these because they're full width, but just for consistency I'm going to tell them to float left too. We'll see how this affects the form. What it's done is it has floated each element left, but this email field has still been affected by this thicker border here. And the way we can deal with that is we can say, we can put on the field the words clear both, and this basically says don't let anything float to the left, don't let anything float to the right of this particular element. So if I do that, it should help with the layout. So there we go, it does float it left on the page, but we don't want this website option to the right of it, and we don't want this to go next to this website option if it does drop down. So we will also put the clear both area on the URL field and the select field. There you go, so that's a much neater layout again. So we can go ahead and put this border, blue border around all the other fields. You can see that quite a lot of the formatting is the same for these different elements. So I could have targeted all the elements with a general default formatting, but I wanted to show you how to target each individual field in case you want to do some of your own unique styling. So there we go, everything's got a nice blue border around it, so we're basically nearly finished. So we're very similar. I've got this get in touch, which isn't important, but I could easily put that in. That's just a H2, heading number 2. So that should add this. And you'll notice I put it within this div so it's aligned. I'm going to remove the border from the div. So I'm going to get in touch. And we've also got this dark line here. So actually it has got a border, it's got a border top on this element. So actually we'll put that back in, because I may as well make this look exactly the same. And it's a thicker 2 pixel when it's solid, and then we want it black, which is this code. Here it is, and it's too tight, so we need to put a margin there. So there's all quite a lot of trial and error involved when you are setting up these forms, which is fine. And this time we're going to put a padding top of, we'll say, 20 pixels. Right, that's nice. But you'll see when we shrink it down, these fields here go smaller than what we should. That's because we need to specify a minimum width. We need to say, yeah, you can be big, but you shrink down and you can only be a minimum width of that, which is 270 pixels. So all we have to do is, for the correct fields, which are this field here, it's min width of 270 pixels. Exactly the same for the submit button. And we'll even put it in for this main div around everything, because that's 80% of the screen, but when it gets to 270 pixels we want it to stay at that. And refresh this, and now you'll see everything shrinks down, then hits that 270 pixels and stops. So there you have it. That is some formatting. A bit of a long-winded tutorial. This is getting on for quite a long time now, but you can see how to style your own gravity forms so they look nice and neat for your website. And if you remember what this default layout of this gravity form was, you can see it's much nicer now. Hope you picked up some tips there about formatting gravity forms, and make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can hear about new videos as soon as they arrive, and also head over to my website, which is www.neilcurtis.me, where you can find more guides and tutorials about WordPress, web design, and even a bit of graphic design.